Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world viewing this 12-step workshop from the Big Book. My name is Herb, I'm an alcoholic. Welcome to the call, to the workshop. I invite you to join me in prayer for an open mind and an open heart. God, please set aside everything that I think I know about myself, my brokenness, my spiritual path, and you. For an open mind and a new experience of myself, my brokenness, my spiritual path, and especially you. Please join me in the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. So today, we're going to take a look at the final phase of step 2. We've looked at the questions that Bill has asked at the beginning of the assignment, at the beginning of his instruction in step 2, with step 1 already covered in some depth in terms of our powerlessness and our no choice. It's really important that at some level we have both an understanding and an experience of no choice, powerless. When we start, we cannot stop. When we stop, we cannot stay stopped. The real problem is unmanageability. Oh, the addiction is a problem, but it's not the problem. And you've heard me say it many times, but it actually requires a repetition, not for redundancy purposes, but so that perhaps really absorb the total existential impact. Existential meaning my personal history. This is what it looks like. I don't have sufficient and effective power to deal with my addiction. And then even when I'm given the gift, because of this mysterious cooperation of my work and God's grace, I'm given abstinence on a daily basis. I experience that my life is unmanageable on my own power. I don't effectively know better. And even when I do effectively know better, I don't effectively do better. This is the human condition. It's not the addict's condition. It's the human condition. Well, those are my terms, trying to summarize my knowledge and my experience of the big books, leading us into the bedevilments, to see the relevancy of them on a daily basis. And Bill says in step 10, we're not cured. If we finish step 9, the book promises that we will be recovered from our addiction. We will have been given the gift of grace of abstinence when we finish the first 9 steps. But he says we have a daily reprieve contingent on the maintenance of our spiritual condition. This is the best kept secret in the rooms of the 12th step, no matter what fellowship. A real deep understanding and experience with what is unmanageability. It's not that I have an addiction and my life is unmanageable because of it. No. Even people without an addiction, without any type of addiction at all, have unmanageability as I've understood it from the big book. No, the big book doesn't imply what I'm saying. Well, it does imply it. It doesn't say it, literally, but it does imply it. And in fact, that may be the reason in the first preface to the first edition, in the first paragraph, Bill ends that paragraph by saying, our way of living may have its advantages for all. This is the foundation, step one. And when we come out of that unmanageability assignment, having completed the will worksheet, not because it's a test, but because it's a prompter for you to have an experience today as you're, in fact, looking at your life and how effective are you with regard to doing what the right thing is, and in fact, even knowing what the right thing is, let alone doing it. I do what I don't want to do, and I don't do what I want to do. And so then we are launched into step two. It's the only hope that there is. We come out of step one hopeless, doomed, powerless. That's our experience. We've tried so many self-help, self-development, human development, religion, therapy, etc., etc. And yet we don't have that harmony, that contentment, that congruence in our life that at least we have a vision of, and sometimes we even have an experience of, or hopefully you've seen somebody with that and you can emulate, knowing that it does exist. Bill asks a question when we start step two. Where and how are we going to find that power? The dynamic that Bill brings to us to help us understand how to communicate this message is phenomenal. He asks questions, then he gives a discussion about it, bringing us almost like Socrates through a process of coming to an experience and a realization. That first question, where and how are we going to find this power, on page 45, and he says, that's really the key to the dilemma. The dilemma is not addiction, he says. The dilemma is a lack of power. So from now on, we're focused on that, not the addiction. We're focused on power or its absence. And he gives us some warm-up material, reinforcing that from pages 44 to 47. And then he says, and he asks another question. This is the second of the second step questions. Do you believe? Well, it's early in the process of step two. And I'm saying process, listen to the step itself. Came to believe, came to believe. Not a light switch event, but a dimmer switch process. Slow, glacially slow in my case. No, seriously, glacially slow. I'll share my experience in a minute with that. Doing this work for the third time 10 years sober. And the man asked me, what is my belief about, my actual current belief about power, higher power, God, as I understand him or as I don't understand him? And as I mentioned, I wrote that out rather nicely, read it to him, and then he said, go home and answer the second question that he would give me. The first question is, what do you actually believe? The second question is, how do you behave in light of what you believe you believe? And then he gave me the balance of the instructions as I have given to you in step two. But when I went home and wrote out how I behaved in light of what I believed I believe, I really had a mind-blowing experience that I don't believe at all. I mean, my feet show me that. My feet, my person shows me that I'm an agnostic, a doubter. Not that I intellectually doubt, no, no doubt intellectually, academically, discussion verbally. But was I consistent in my meditation practice? Did I rely on a daily basis on a power other than myself, or was I mostly self-willed? And the answer, of course, was yes. Those bedevilments were in technicolor in my life 10 years sober, despite the fact of having had 2 prior spiritual awakenings, because I went through the steps twice with different mechanics, people who really understood the path and the steps process. And I had wonderful, deep experiences in many of the steps with each of those 2 people. But I blew by steps 2 and 3. This time the man, 1994, third time going through the steps, introduced me to the set-aside prayer. Oh, I believe that was the key. So that I could set aside. I didn't even know that I needed to set aside. So I invited the Spirit to set it aside. And without further ado, it got set aside. Not that I knew that, not that I felt that, not that I was aware of that. No, no. But my experience shows it. In answering that question, how do I behave? I began to have a veil-rending experience that I'm an agnostic and that my steps 2 and step 3 were done robotically previously. And on page 47, we saw this in our last workshop. Bill says, do you believe? And if you don't, there's a fallback position. Are you willing to believe? And if because of your experience with step 1, powerlessness with regard to addiction and powerless with regard to your life and its manageability, if you can say, yes, I actually need some help, whatever that is to you, whatever that help might look like, even as a mystery, just in the sort of open space, apparently I need help because I'm not doing a very good job on my own power. If you're willing to believe, he said, that's enough to commence your spiritual growth. And then he goes through, as I pointed out, some logic, some poetry, some emotion, some cajoling, some salesmanship, until we get to page 53. And then he asks us a much more black and white, laser focused question. God is or God isn't, what is your choice? God is or God isn't, what is your choice? Well, now he's not clearly saying that step 2 is a decision, but he's certainly implying it. God is or God isn't. Oh, that's my choice. He says on page 53, now we're confronted with the question of faith. Now we're confronted with the question of faith. Okay, so confront ourselves. What is faith? Well, faith is not knowledge. Faith is not feeling. What makes us specifically human? Our knowledge and our ability to make a decision. Our knowledge, our mind, and our decision-making capabilities, our will. Okay. Now, on page 53, arrived at this point, we were squarely confronted with the question of faith. I confronted myself. He says we couldn't duck the issue. We had walked far over the bridge of reason. And as I think I mentioned, I believe that's kind of tongue-in-cheek, even though it's capital B, capital R. He's not actually saying that that's God, the bridge of reason. He's saying that that's our delusion about our own power, I believe. Down further, he talks about the outlines and promise of a new land, capital N, capital L. The final assignment 8 had you reread chapter 4, looking for the positive, looking for the synonyms, looking for the resonance with things that you agree with. New land. That's a synonym for a power other than ourselves. Friendly hands had stretched out in welcome. We were grateful that reason had brought us so far, meaning our ability for logic and calculation and discernment on a human level. But we made gods of our reason, and I think that's why it might be capitalized here. He's not, I don't believe, suggesting that reason is a synonym for God. It's just my take on it. Somehow we couldn't quite step ashore. Perhaps we had been leaning too heavily on reason, our ability to span the chasm, to leap the gap. In my mind, I have the thoughts of the 19th century existentialists that talk about the leap of faith. Well, that's what we're talking about here. We're making a decision. God is. There's no evidence, there's no knowledge, there's no certitude. It's a decision. It's a simple decision, but it's an empty decision. It's thin and dark. No substance at all to it. Thin and dark. No substance at all to it. I like to form a triangle. You might try that. As I'm talking right now, put a triangle on a piece of paper. And on the left-hand slope, put body. On the right-hand slope, put mind. And on the bottom, put will. I'm going to change that. Put body on the left-hand side, put will on the right-hand side, put mind as the bottom line. And it might seem too subtle to have any significance, but my experience was looking at this triangle, which was initially the kind of the logo of AA, where they had steps and traditions and concepts in that order from the base foundation of the steps. Bill called them our legacy. Legacy 1 being the steps, legacy 2 being the traditions, legacy 3 being the concepts. And I have used the model coming into this work and the workshop of the human being as having 3 parts: body, mind, and will. So is faith a function of the mind, the bottom line? You could put an X through it. No, it's not. There's no certitude or knowledge attached to faith by definition. It's the acceptance of that for which there is no evidence. Is it a function of the bodies, a function of my adrenal glands, a function of my feelings and emotions? When I feel the presence of God, God's present, and when I don't, God's absent. Well, even saying it out loud, it doesn't make any sense. Not the objective reality of underneath the concept that we're trying to articulate. No name is adequate, and Bill has very clearly said that, because any name that we generate is finite. And the reality that we're attempting to imagine and we hope exists is immaterial and infinite. Rather than matter, it's spirit. And we can talk the talk and we can think the thought, but it doesn't have any reality to it, because we've never and can't ever put it in a box. Any God that we can name effectively is not God, by definition, because everything about us is finite. And this, whatever it is that we're hoping exists, is infinite. It would be like trying to put the ocean in a bucket. A bucket is not large enough. I don't care how large the bucket is. It's not going to hold the ocean. That was a wonderful metaphor that was given to me in my second grade. I still remember that explanation, and it made total sense to me. I could imagine that. God is or God isn't. What is your choice, he says. It's a decision. Oh, it's so clear now that it's an act of my will, not of my mind, not of my body, but of my will. That decision. Then my mind says, okay, it's logical. It makes sense. Theoretically, it's probable, or at least I hope that it is real. There's hope and acceptance by my mind of the decision that my will made God is. And then the final phase of that is to act as if it's true. My body gets engaged then in an act of trust. My decision is my act of faith. My acceptance is my act of belief. And my actions are acts of trust. And now I understand clearly some of the definitions that are not so clear in the dictionary. Faith is a decision, empty, no substance, dark, thin, no graspable reality. But my mind says, I'm screwed if it's not true, because I really do need a power other than myself. My life shows me that. It's not academic, it's not theoretical. On a practical level, I've tried everything, including AA and including 4 years of sobriety. At that point, 10 years of sobriety. And I saw that my concept of God was the very impediment to my relationship with the mystery. I hope you can hear that. My concept of God, 10 years sober, had not changed. I blew through the steps in 1984 when I did it very superficially with my sponsor. I blew again through steps 2 and 3 when I did the work again with mechanics who understood and the spiritual awakening in themselves had had a spiritual awakening, but because I held on to my prior concepts and experiences in my traditional religion, I had no new information and no new experience. But at 10 years of sobriety, this man gave me the set-aside prayer and then gave me the exercise of looking at unmanageability for the very first time. I had never seen unmanageability as those bedevilments and the nature of it being selfishness and self-centeredness over which I have no power. That's how Bill ends the second paragraph on page 62, doesn't he? We can't even reduce it much by wishing or trying on our own power. We had to have God's help. So between the addiction experience summarized on page 43, no effective mental defense, and the unmanageability, powerless, no choice, as described on page 62, our only hope is that there is this power. And we're brought to a place where I make this decision, God is, and then I move forward. Page 54, Bill again continues to talk a little bit more about emotions. It's wonderful. Who of us had not loved something or somebody? How much of these feelings, these loves, these worships have to do with pure reason? Little or nothing, we saw it last. Were not these things the tissue out of which our lives were constructed? Listen to his respect for emotions. I mean, he has a high regard for the impact, the actual daily impact of emotions on our life. Were not these things the tissue out of which our lives were constructed? Did not these feelings, after all, determine the course of our existence? Now, especially as addicts, we can really identify with that. Then he goes into some more logic, but then on page 55, he gets to answer the question that he posed on page 45. Where and how are we going to find this power? On page 55, he said, we had to search fearlessly, but God is there. God is as much a fact as we are. We found the great reality. Now, there's a synonym you can work with, capital G, capital R. Deep down within us. Oh, that's where. Search fearlessly. Oh, that's how. Deep down within us, that's where. And answers to those two questions he posed on page 45. Where and how are we going to find that power? He continues. In the last analysis, it is only there, deep down inside, that God can be found. This is such an important concept to Bill that he repeats it in different words, but it's a completely redundant paragraph. It's only 2 or 3 times that Bill becomes very redundant, because that's how important it is. We saw that, or will see that, in the 3rd column of the resentment inventory, where he repeats himself almost literally in 2 different paragraphs. Very unlike Bill, who doesn't even want to use the same words in consecutive sentences, let alone have a consecutive redundant paragraph. And so this next paragraph has got to be pretty important because it's reinforcing the prior paragraph. We can only clear the ground a bit if our testimony helps sweep away prejudices. Bill is talking about the set-aside attitude. Set aside our prejudgments, our knowledge, our experience, any other thing that gives us a connection to the past that has not been effective, but we don't know that it hasn't been very effective. If our testimony helps sweep away prejudice and enables you to think honestly, oh, another hint as to the answer. How am I going to find God? He's given us one, search diligently. Now he's telling us to think honestly. Then if you wish, encourages you to search diligently within yourself. So now it's search diligently and search fearlessly. He's given us 2 action items there. Within yourself, again, deep down, that's where. Then if you wish, you can join us on the broad highway. Beautiful image, capital B, capital H. The journey is the destination. The journey is the destination. We are on the broad highway. We are part of the broad highway. There's a mystical insight there of non-dualistic. It's not God and me, it's God as me. I'm going a little bit beyond what the big book is actually saying, but he is implying it from my understanding and my experience. With this attitude, you cannot fail. The consciousness of your belief is sure to come to you. Reinforcing his articulation of step 2. Came to believe, a process, like a dimmer switch, not like a light switch. But then he says, with this attitude, you cannot fail. All right, he's introduced a word here. I look it up in a dictionary. I hope you did. What does it mean here? In the context of this material, I believe what it means is search fearlessly, search diligently, think honestly. With this attitude, you cannot fail. Notice the proactive nature of it. The invitation to honesty and the invitation to action. Search diligently, search fearlessly. deep down inside, which reinforces what we saw in the spiritual experience, doesn't it? Page 567, 568, it's the crossover phrase. Unsuspected inner resource. Unsuspected. It's the last place I really looked. Inner, deep down inside of myself. Resource. A power other than myself that is available to me and is in fact a benevolent power. Unsuspected inner resource. Again, another meditation. The consciousness of your belief is sure to come to you. Richard Rohr has one of my teachers, ROHR. He's a Franciscan priest, probably a mystic, certainly a theologian and a prolific writer. A prophet, probably, in his own time. He says, faith is the acceptance of that for which there is no evidence. And once we accept it, the evidence appears. I just love it. It's worth, again, noting and pondering. Faith is the acceptance of that for which there is no evidence. And once we accept it, the evidence appears. Today, when I look back over my shoulder, it is my explanation. It may or may not be accurate and true objectively. I don't know. And quite frankly, I don't care. Because I know when I believe and I take action as if I believe and I walk this path with confidence and hope, my life has flourished for 31 years. Flourished. That's the word I will use. Is it without speed bumps? Absolutely not. But I have shock absorbers now to handle the speed bumps. On page 56, he gives us another example of somebody who had the same experience he had. This powerful mountaintop spiritual experience, overwhelmed by a conviction of the presence of God. It poured over and through him with the certainty and majesty of a great tide at flood. The barriers he had built through the years were swept away. He stood in the presence of infinite power and love. What poetry, it's fabulous. He had stepped from bridge to shore. For the first time, he lived in conscious companionship with his Creator. I had prepared myself for my second step, making that decision that God is, and seeing the chasm in front of me where I didn't see any way to get to the other side. That leap of faith is what I thought it was, that when I actually make the decision and then take the actions, I will be able to spring from one side to the other side. And in that meditation, I realized I was on the other side. Yeah, no, this is a moment for me. I had visions of being the athlete that would hurtle myself from one side of doubt to the other side of faith and belief. And I realized I had been picked up and carried to the other side and placed in a position of a relationship with this power. It was overwhelming. It lasted a couple, 3 minutes. And as I came out of it, I just wondered if I'd had too much caffeine that morning. So again, I can see that I'm powerless to effect the result. But somehow there is a mysterious, magical formula where I am willing to embrace the instructions and embrace the actions, and it's done to me, not by me. That spiritual awakening that we read about in Appendix 2. He says, now, this is the cornerstone. No later vicissitude, no later calamity, personal speed bumps. Seemingly, he could not drink even if he would. God had restored his sanity. You either are powerless or you're not powerless. He's suggesting that he doesn't even have the power of choice to drink. That's worthy of a very nice discussion. Seemingly, he could not drink even if he would. God had restored his sanity. So give him a protective spiritual shield. What is this but a miracle of healing? Circumstances made him willing. Step one. He humbly offered himself to his maker. Step two. God restored us all to our right minds, meaning that protective shield where we're invulnerable to the obsession. The revelation was sudden spiritual experience. That's this man's experience as well as Bill's, of course, not mine. Tediously, glacially slow. Some of us grow into it more slowly. That's me, spiritual awakening. But here's the promises now, some more promises of step two. God has come to all who have honestly sought. When we drew near to God, God discloses God's self to us. Here are the assumptions, though. There's action here. There's gift, and there's grace. And there's action on our part. The gift is the grace, the willingness, and the participation on our part is the action. It's a mysterious formula, grace and willingness. I took it into meditation to try to unpack it and understand it. I didn't unpack it and understand it, but I was given a poem that really helped me. I was taken to a place of willingness. Hear the grace. I was taken to a place of willingness, but I was willing to be taken. Hear my cooperation. That's why I like the term co-creator here. And at this point, the conclusion on the assignment was to now create my own concept of God. I'm not creating God. I'm creating my concept of God. And I actually don't remember what concept that was. I know that in 1988, I had the concept of father and child, son. And in 1991, I had chose mentor teacher because I was still really learning. And in 1994, this time going through the steps, as I just indicated with the set-aside prayer, the experience with the bedevilments, and now cracking open the curtain to see my own agnosticism. I don't really remember what my term was. Probably spirit of some kind, something that had a vague connotation to it so that it didn't get any type of image to it. So it's important for each of you on the phone workshop, when you get to the final piece of step two, is to write out your concept. For you, what qualities and attributes do you need this higher power to have? Right now, you're not creating it. You're creating your concept of it, capital I, it. And it will change as you do. This concept will change as you do, as your needs change, as your desires change, as your emotional and spiritually developed changes evolutionary style over time. So it's not to be clung to as now I've got the answer, it's black and white. No, that's not how this works. At least this is my experience. We make a decision about a concept. Step one is an experience that we don't have effective decision-making capabilities, neither for our addiction nor for our managing our life. Step two then says, well, I hope there is some power. I'm going to live my life as if there is this power, and I'm going to use my free will to choose a concept for myself about this power. I have no idea whether it's true or not, and it doesn't make any difference to me that I have any validation, certitude, or feeling about it. I'm going to make a decision because this is what I need right now. This is what I want right now. These attributes and qualities with regard to my addiction and with regard to my managing my own life. Thank you so much, everybody that shared today. And let's pray the serenity prayer. And God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. Thank you, everybody.